Welcome back to Big Find Cases. On this channel, we read the write-ins that land in our inbox, storage unit stories from regular people who took one careful risk and ended up in something they didn't expect. Today's letter is about a unit that looked cheap and unknown, came with a 48-hour cleanout clock, and opened to a scene that honestly sounds like a prank until it doesn't. Let me read it the way it came in. Hi. Please don't use our real last name. You can call us Elaine and Walt. We're both in our late 60s, and we're writing because your videos made us feel like we weren't crazy for even considering a storage unit. We're not the big score type. We're the kind of people who keep receipts in a drawer and reuse gift bags until they fall apart. That's why what happened to us still feels unreal, even though it was mostly just work, smell, and stubbornness. Here's the part that hit us first, before any backstory. We opened the door and saw a wall of curb carts. Not boxes, not furniture, trash carts, black and blue and a few green ones, packed tight from the entrance all the way to the back, like somebody built a barricade. The air had that cold plastic smell at first, and then there was a sour note under it that made my eyes water. And what made it worse was realizing we weren't alone in the moment. Down the lane, a few employees were watching, and when we stood there stunned, they started laughing like it was the punchline. Walt didn't say anything. He just got very still in that way that means he's trying not to let anger make decisions for him. Now I'll rewind and tell you why we were even there. We've been fine for years in the way older couples say fine when they mean we're okay as long as nothing breaks, nobody gets sick, and the car keeps starting. His pension covers the basics, Social Security fills the gaps, and we've learned the tricks: store brands, stretching meals, putting off the non-urgent stuff. But the past year felt like it was made of small hits. A new prescription, a dental estimate we didn't like looking at, a leak stain that kept spreading even after we handled it. None of it was dramatic on its own. It was just enough to make us tired of holding our breath every time the mailbox clunked. A neighbor put the storage idea in our heads, not in a treasure way, more like people leave behind tools and sealed house stuff, and if you're careful, you can make a little breathing room. Walt hated it at first. He kept saying cheap units turn into dump runs, and he wasn't wrong. But I told him something I still stand by. Bills are already stress. At least this would be stress we chose. We set a hard limit, promised each other we'd walk if the bidding climbed, and we agreed we'd only try one unit, one time, just to see. The listing that got us didn't give us much. The door was closed in the photo, and the description was basically contents unknown, heavy items. That should have scared us off, but the starting price was low and the timing was quiet. We kept telling ourselves winter makes people lazy about hauling, so maybe we'd avoid the big resellers. Still, the part that really mattered wasn't the price, it was the rule: 48 hours to clear it out. That clock changes how you think. You can't figure it out later. Later is how you lose. The auction itself felt small and tired. A few regulars in boots, a guy who looked like he enjoyed math, a couple people who seemed to buy units the way others buy lottery tickets. Walt and I stayed quiet. When our unit came up, they didn't even do a dramatic reveal. The door stayed down. The auctioneer repeated heavy items, and a couple people snickered like they already knew it was trash.
Walt raised our card anyway, not to show off, just because backing down from laughter felt like letting strangers decide what we were allowed to try. The bidding jumped a couple times, then died fast. We won it for a number we could live with, low enough to feel like a chance, but high enough that my stomach flipped the second the gavel hit, because winning meant responsibility, not a prize. Back in the office, the mood got weird. Two employees looked at our paperwork and shared a look like, oh, these two. The manager reminded us about the cleanout deadline in that flat voice people use when they think you're about to learn a lesson. Walt paid for a lock change because he wanted control of access, and then we walked down to the unit with the key tag feeling too light in his hand, like it didn't match the weight of what we'd just bought. The unit was near a back corner where the wind cuts through. Walt unlocked it, and before he even lifted the door all the way, we heard it, something inside shifting, a plastic scrape like wheels bumping in a tight space. Then he lifted the roll-up, and there they were, rows of curb carts, packed so tight you could barely see the back wall. Some lids were scuffed and filthy, like they'd been rolled through alleys. A couple had newer tape. One had a zip tie, and near the back row there was one gray cart that didn't look like the rest because somebody had strapped it down with a ratchet strap, cinched hard like cargo. The side panel bowed outward just a little, the way plastic bows when something heavy has been pressing from inside for a long time. We stood there in silence for a second, and I could feel the embarrassment trying to crawl up my throat because of the laughing down the lane. But underneath that embarrassment was something colder, the feeling that this wasn't random. 20 carts aren't an accident. The way they were lined up wasn't careless, and that strapped gray one, it looked less like trash and more like someone didn't want it to open by itself. Walt finally whispered, "We're not touching that one first." And I knew exactly what he meant, because whatever was making that cart bow wasn't going to be the kind of problem you solve by rushing. We didn't start with the strapped gray cart, even though it pulled at our eyes like a magnet. Walt said the same thing twice, like he needed to hear it out loud, front to back, one problem at a time. The first problem was obvious. If those carts were full of real garbage, the dump fees alone could wipe us out, and we'd still have to meet that 48-hour deadline. So we picked the ugliest-looking cart at the front row and cracked it open. The smell hit like a slap. Not old boxes smell. This was wet trash that had been sealed too long. Split bags, food waste, soggy cardboard mashed into the bottom. I stepped back so fast I almost lost my footing on the cold concrete, and Walt's eyes watered even though he tried to pretend they didn't. We shut it, dragged it out of the unit, and lined it up outside like quarantine. The second cart was worse, with broken glass buried under sludge, and that's when the laughter down the lane started up again. They weren't laughing because it was funny. They were laughing because they thought we'd quit. We didn't quit, but I'll be honest, I wanted to. I kept thinking, we paid money for this humiliation. Walt didn't argue with my feelings. He just kept moving. He pulled on thicker gloves, told me not to reach into anything blind, and we started treating every cart like it could hold something sharp. After 4 carts, a pattern showed up that made my stomach turn. The filth was concentrated near the front like a deliberate barrier, but the carts deeper in looked cleaner. Some lids were held down with a zip tie looped twice. Some had a strip of fresh tape that didn't match the older grime. That didn't prove anything, but it felt intentional.
If you've ever opened a unit that felt set up to make someone give up, I'd genuinely like to know your personal rule in that moment, what you do first to stay safe and not get rushed into a mistake. Reading those little rules is the only reason we have any confidence now. About an hour later, we hit our first cart that didn't stink. A blue one, cleaner lid, newer tape. Walt cut the tape carefully and lifted it like he expected another trap. Nothing, just dry air and dust. Inside, the cart was packed in layers, flattened cardboard on top like a false floor, then a clean contractor bag tied tight. Under that bag sat a smaller tote snapped shut. It was so organized it didn't belong next to rotting food waste. When we opened the tote, it wasn't one big treasure. It was a weird mix that made no sense together. 2 boxed kitchen appliances that looked unopened, a stack of sealed toiletry kits, and a handful of small electronics boxes without anything loose rattling around. It felt like someone packed a hurry-up stash and then hid it inside the least appealing container on Earth. That's what made the day so disorienting. Every time we thought we understood the unit, it changed. One cart held nothing but winter coats and boots, but a couple pockets had coin rolls tucked in like somebody didn't trust drawers. Another had a camera bag wrapped in plastic with a mid-range camera body and 2 lenses, each wrapped like they mattered. Another had boxed perfumes lined up like a tiny store shelf. Then you'd open the next cart and it would be worthless again. Broken hangers, damp books, old cords and knots, junk that would never sell. It was like the unit had been designed to punish you for hoping. We also noticed the small marks,
Not dramatic symbols, nothing theatrical, just a quick black marker dash on certain lids, always in the same corner. A short line, like a person marking "this one" without writing words. Once we saw it, we couldn't unsee it. Most of the marked carts were the cleaner ones deeper in the unit. The filthy carts at the front suddenly felt like decoys, placed there to make a buyer gag, slam the door, and walk away from the work. By mid-afternoon, the mood in the lane had changed. The employees weren't laughing anymore. They were watching in that quiet way people watch when they're trying to look casual and failing. Walt kept his voice low and his face blank. He didn't leave anything sitting out longer than it had to. We'd move an item straight to the car, then back to the carts. It felt ridiculous to be careful like that, but it also felt smart. The moment you look excited in a storage lane, you invite somebody else's curiosity. Finally, we faced the strapped gray cart. It took real effort to pull it free. The wheels resisted like they were carrying something dense, not just full. The ratchet strap was cinched so tight the plastic lip of the lid had bowed. Walt loosened the strap one click at a time, and I swear the cart made a low creak like it was relieved. He lifted the lid, and I braced for stink again. No stink, just clean foam. Cut into that foam was the shape of a compact fire-rated safe, heavy and snug like it had been stored for travel. The safe was wrapped in a clean bag, and taped to it was a plain envelope. No big warning, no drama, just a few lines in steady handwriting that made my skin go cold anyway. Basically, don't open this in the lane and don't hand it to the office to be helpful. It didn't read like a movie message. It read like somebody who'd learned the hard way that the wrong kind of help makes things disappear.
Walt didn't even touch the dial. He just looked at me and said, "Home, kitchen table, bright light." Then he picked up the safe like it was heavier than its weight, and we walked it out as calmly as we could manage, like we were carrying nothing more interesting than a toolbox. That night, we set the safe down between us on the kitchen table and just stared at it for a long minute. We didn't feel lucky yet. We felt cautious, because the unit had already taught us one thing. Whoever packed those carts didn't want the first person who opened that door to reach the back. And now we had the back, sitting in our own house, still locked. We waited until we were home, the doors locked, the kettle on, and the whole house quiet enough to hear our own breathing. That sounds dramatic when you write it down, but it wasn't drama. It was us trying to be smart. A storage lane is full of strangers, and we'd already watched the staff treat our unit like entertainment. We put the safe on the kitchen table under the brightest light we had and agreed on one thing before we touched it. No rushing, no showing off, no "let's see what happens." The envelope taped to the bag didn't have a wild story in it. It was short and plain, like someone who was exhausted and trying not to lose the last thread of control. It said the cart wall was meant to make people quit early, and it asked whoever found the safe not to hand it to the office for safekeeping. It also said, in so many words, that if we found personal documents with a name and address, we should return those, but not the valuables. Walt read that twice, then just nodded like he'd already lived through enough human nature to believe it. The safe itself opened cleanly, no tricks, just weight. Inside wasn't one perfect movie pile. It was a careful stash, a modest stack of cash bundled tight, a few gold pieces in small bags, and coins in capsules and rolls with years written on tape. There was also a thin folder of pawn tickets and purchase slips that matched some of the brands we'd already pulled from the cleaner carts. That folder mattered more than the glitter, because it made the whole thing feel less like a crime and more like someone's private emergency plan. I remember standing there with a ring in my palm thinking, a person hid their life in a trash cart. I didn't feel giddy. I felt sad first, then relieved, then guilty for being relieved. The next morning we went back and finished the unit the boring way. That part doesn't sound fun on camera, but it's the difference between a good story and a disaster. We kept trash and sellable things separate, and we didn't try to save anything that smelled like mold or had been soaked. We paid for one extra day because the 48-hour window was real, and we'd already lost hours just dealing with the decoy carts. Dump runs were the biggest hit. Between landfill fees and a small trailer rental, it ate a few $100s fast. Supplies added up too. Heavy bags, gloves, cleaner, tape, a couple of tarps. None of that is exciting, but it's what makes the math honest. We also did one thing that mattered to our conscience. We found a small folder of personal papers buried in a clean tote, mail, a couple of documents, enough to identify a person. We returned only that folder to the office and asked for a signed handoff because we didn't want any later confusion about what we did or didn't bring in. The manager acted polite but tight. Walt kept it simple, thanked her, and walked out. No speeches, no arguments, just done.
Selling took longer than the cleanout, and we did it slow on purpose. Anything electronic went to a local buyer who tests in front of you and pays with a receipt because we didn't want online chargeback games. The jewelry went to a jeweler who weighed everything where we could see the scale. We took scrap money for the plain pieces and consigned the nicer items instead of getting lowballed on the spot. The coins went to a coin shop with good reviews and bright lights, where they check authenticity in front of you and write the offer down. For the boxed household items and the odd, clean finds, we sold locally in small batches, public meetup spot, daytime, no one coming to our house. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept us calm. When we finally added it all up, it felt unreal in the quietest way. The unit itself was a few $100s with fees, the extra day was another chunk, and the dump runs and supplies were real costs. Even after all that, the profit landed in that sweet spot where it changes your year without sounding like a fantasy, right around the low 5 figures by the time the last consignment payout came through. Not quit your life money, but fix what you've been avoiding money. We replaced the water heater before it died on us. We handled the dentist visits we kept pushing out. We put new tires on Walt's car without turning it into a family debate. And we bought our grandson a birthday gift that didn't feel like an apology. We kept one thing from the whole mess, and it wasn't the flashiest item. It was that compact telescope kit from the marked cart. Walt set it up on a clear night, and we took turns looking at the moon like two people who'd been holding their breath for months and finally remembered how to exhale. That's the part I didn't expect. The unit didn't just give us money, it gave us a little bit of our dignity back. We walked in as the couple everyone laughed at, and we walked out on our own terms. Thanks for reading our letter, and thanks for keeping names private if you share it. We're still amazed that somebody could build a wall of trash carts on purpose, and even more amazed that careful, slow work beat it in the end. Big find cases. If you made it to the end of this one, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment with the one rule you'd follow the moment you opened a unit and realized it was staged to make you quit. We read those notes, and they shape which case files we pull from the inbox next.